Hi, I'm Celeste, and this is 10 Minutes of History from the Balboa Island Museum. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Spanish land grants and the Mexican land grants, which is kind of a continuation of our last 10 minutes, which is the mission system. So, where we ended off there was the end of the mission system, and then just prior to that, we had the 1810 Spanish land grant to Yorba from the King of Spain. So in 1821, when Mexico gets their independence from Spain, and they want to change everything up because now they want these to be Mexican land grants, because we went from Native American territory to Spanish territory, and now we're in Mexican territory. They confirmed the Yorba land grant, and so now it becomes a Mexican land grant. And then the name of his rancho is the Rancho Santiago de Santa Ana. And then they give in 1837 to Jose Andres Sepulveda his land grant, which is most of the San Juan Capistrano mission land, plus he gets another add-on of more land too. And his land rancho is called Rancho San Joaquin. So he, and I think of him as kind of Jay Gatsby, because he's party guy. He and his beautiful wife, they have a lot of fiestas. He's big into horse racing. He has a huge famous horse race with Pio Pico, and they have just lots of parties and lots of gambling and lots of children. Their main home is in Los Angeles, and they have a big house up there. And then this is kind of their summer ranch. Just like when it becomes part of Irvine, it's pretty much the same thing. He's in San Francisco, and this is their summer property. So the main purpose of the ranchos, like I said, was to populate the area. They all had cattle ranches, just like the missions. The purpose of the cattle was to raise hides and tallow, and these were shipped out. Tallow because we needed candles, pre-electricity. Lots of tallow went into making candles for light. And then the hides were sent out, shipped out. This was where Richard Henry Dana comes in, and he comes to Dana Point and writes the history of how they throw those hides off the cliffs and get them into the Shailene ships and send them back east and across the world, actually. So he makes fun of Sepulveda in his book, 2 Years Before the Mass. He says about Sepulveda that he doesn't care about the shoreline, which is important later on in our story, because he said he doesn't even have a boat, and it's also very hard to catch a fish from the back of a horse. And so he mentions him by name, and he makes fun of him basically in this book. So we go along, and they're still raising all these cattle, both of these ranchos, and then there's problems that arise. And the biggest problem that they have is that California, we come into the end of the Mexican-American War, and this is just right before the gold rush, and we're tired of fighting for this land, and Mexico is trying to retain their possession of Alta California. And so what we finally do is we say, look, we're going to buy it. And so for I think it's $50 million for that, we buy Alta California, and it's California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and parts of Wyoming and Colorado. So it's a big old piece of property. So that's what happens. It becomes part of a territory of the United States. Now, this is in 1848. The importance of this date is that also in 1848, the beginning of 1848, that's when gold is discovered up in Sutter's Mill, Northern California. The rancho owners have, at this time, like I said, been raising these cattle for hides and tallow. Now they start fattening these cattle up and sending up to San Francisco to sell for beef, because we have this huge influx of men coming up into Northern California that want to eat. And so they are making a good amount of money selling these cattle for beef. The problem is that then we encounter this really big drought, and this is in the middle of the 1860s, and almost every head of cattle in California dies during this drought. The problem is that now we have become a state in 1850. Of course, the United States wants this state now that gold's been discovered, and we're coming into the civil unrest down in the South, and we're going to be a free state, a non-slave state, and we're going to hopefully use some of this rich state's money in order to supply the North and help win the Civil War too, and which does end up happening. So the rancho owners now need to pay taxes, and in order to pay those taxes, they need to survey their property. I think it's interesting to know how you measured things back in that time. One of the things they did was they would put two people on horses, two different horses, with a big, long, measured length of rawhide between them, and they would, just like you would measure the downs in a football game, one horse would stay stationary, the other would ride out the length of that rope, and then they would count that, and then the next horse, the one that was still, would then pass the other horse. That's 2 lengths. They would just keep doing that. The problem then too was that you had to have landmarks. That's where Red Hill comes in. The actual hill of Red Hill is a very important landmark in this area because it was so prominent, and it was the division of several ranchos because you could see it. You had to be able to tell them when you were surveying your land what points your land went to, and we didn't have buildings and things, so maybe it went from a creek. That's why a lot of things, the Santa Ana River divides, because it's a nice landmark. So they had to measure, and that cost them money to come in and have actual surveys confirmed. They had to pay lawyers to establish their ownership, to confirm that they had these grants given to them, and that cost them a lot of money. Then they would have been fine if the drought hadn't happened, if they had retained their income, but all of a sudden their income is gone. And and this brings us a little bit into the Irvine story, which we've told before too, because Irvine is up now in Monterey raising sheep, which don't need as much water, and so his sheep have not died in this drought. So Sepulveda starts borrowing money to pay money, to borrowing money to pay money, and he just gets into so much debt that he ends up needing to sell. And so he sells his property completely to Irvine and his partners, the Bixby's and Flints. And then but at that time, when they do that, the state of California says, okay, we're going to, the sale is fine. When they confirmed, this is actually prior, when we become a state, when they confirm Sepulveda's rancho is when they actually do this. But they say, we're not going to let you keep the shoreline. So, and we know from Dana's book that he didn't care, that Sepulveda didn't even care about the shoreline. He basically was all about the land part of his rancho. So they kept the shoreline. And this is really important when we come in later, when McFadden goes to buy the bay, because it's not owned by Irvine at that point. Because when Irvine buys Sepulveda land, he doesn't get the shoreline either. And then that is able to be purchased by McFadden when he goes in and makes that sale for $1 an acre. So, going back, Irvine and his partners buy that whole Capistrano land. They also buy another rancho, which was behind the Mission property, which was owned by one of Yorba's nephews. So they end up with like 100,000 acres. On the other side, we have the Yorba Rancho, which ran basically from Hoag Hospital up to the mountains, Santa Ana River, today's 55 freeway. And that needs to be split up. And the reason is because there's too many heirs, and other people have come in and purchased land from some of those heirs, and one of those was Irvine and his partners. They had purchased a percentage of that. The courts come in and they split it up and they divide the land out by percentage of what people owned at that time to the different heirs, and that's when Irvine and his partners end up with that 3/4 strip that goes from the shoreline all the way up to the mountains, and that just gives them basically the other side of the bay is what it gives them, which also becomes important with McFadden, because then McFadden has to rent that section from Irvine in order to put his grain silo up there above the Newport Landing. So the heirs end up with their parcels, and that's when we get the original division. This is the southern part of that rancho, and this is a great map. Unfortunately, very hard for you to see, but we see this whole swath goes to Glasell. This is the Flint, Bixby, Irvine little slice here. This is Paularino, which is not spelled anything like our Paularino area that we have today, but it's the same reference. And then this whole James McFadden area up here. later we have, this is a 1803 map. This is a great map of Orange County, from the Orange County Title Company that we had donated to us. And it shows what happened to that property later, and that's where we get in here and we have the bannings that come in, and there's like 5 different bannings buying property in here, and it's just fun to go in here and see the original names of the people that end up buying property then from those different heirs. So so that's basically what happens to the ranchos, and that's pretty much the same thing that happens to all of the ranchos up and down the coast. That's how Irvine and his partners end up with that big rancho up in Monterey, where they originally bring the sheep over with Hollister from the Midwest, because pretty much every rancho had the same problem by losing the cattle and not being able to support themselves and their taxes and their bills that came about when we became a state. So I think are we pretty close to 10 minutes? I think I covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover here. So that's about it. Thanks for watching.